It's my pleasure today to introduce Professor Todd Lewis in the College of the Holy Cross. And please join me now in welcoming Professor Todd Lewis.
Well, thanks for the invitation to come. I once gave a talk here when I was in the 1980s, when I still wasn't completely in religious studies professionally, for an anthropologist named G. William Skinner, who we talked about networks, because my original research in Nepal was on Buddhist merchants. And one of my follow-up to my PhD research projects was to trace Newar merchants through the Himalayan hills, including as far as Lhasa, Tibet. So I learned a lot from Skinner and from those days, and it helped me focus on networks and social relationships as part of understanding Buddhism and Buddhist history. So let's see if we can. So I want to begin by thanking also the many people who've been helpful to me in my career, and especially to some of my assistants, such as the man shown here, whose photographs will be the content of the last part of the talk, in which we've been documenting the construction of a new Buddhist monastery in Lumbini, the birthplace of the Buddha, and the international monastic park that's located there. So everyone should have a handout, and you can read along, or if you get bored with me, you can look at some of the illustrations. I think that they're more or less connected. First of all, I want to make it clear, and I'm assuming a general audience and not specialists today, but I want to make clear that Nepal as a category, as a term, used to simply mean the Kathmandu Valley. And only since really 1821 has Nepal meant the modern state with its current boundaries. And this state was created by a hill tribe from the area called Gorkha, and their armies conquered all the way to Kashmir and all the way to and passed into Bhutan, until they had tangles with the British and the modern country's boundaries were established, as I say, in 1821. So I think it's important to understand the valley in its relationship, to understand its traditions and its constraints and the possibilities and its material cultural history. So I think everyone who works in Sanskrit knows about the great archives that exist in the Kathmandu Valley. Many thousands of manuscripts are found in the National Archives and monastic collections, in various private archives that are now publicly available, as well as probably equal numbers that are in private homes to this day. And what's always struck me with the wonderful art and architecture and the textual culture is how slow it has been for scholars to look seriously at the rest of what we'd say would be Newar culture. That is, the living traditions that still endure to the present day. So if you look at the handout, you can see I collected some famous examples of this long-term, early first draft of history, looking at the Newars and their Buddhism as something corrupted or not really different from Hinduism, or that it is their scribes are terrible, and that's not completely false, but that it's just a problematic tradition, and above all, not to be taken seriously. So what troubles me about that is that I've spent most of my career trying to document and study these traditions, and the people I work with would be very upset for anyone to say that their practice and their traditions were not Buddhist, and that they were indistinguishable from Hindus, and that their tradition was not, did not have its legacy and its connections, its parampara, back into Indic Buddhism. In fact, it's sort of strange that with this survival of ancient Indic Buddhism, that even Sylvain Lévy pointed out, that there's still pretty few of us who work in this field. Besides Alexander von Rospat at Berkeley and David Gellner at Oxford, who has many other South Asian projects that he does, there may be a few others, but the field has never really grown very much. So in a way, I hope to interest younger scholars in this field of study. And I know Eric's already been converted to this, the value of Newar traditions, but I really do think there's much to be gained from looking beyond the text into the cultural traditions. So these are sort of my oldest complaints about the field in trying to get out of the solely philological approach that dominates Buddhist studies, and to see the connectedness of the traditions in the Kathmandu Valley to what we're interested in trying to understand. This came out dramatically about 10 years ago when Ron Davidson gave a talk about his new book on attempting to reconstruct the history of Tantric Buddhism, and he said the basis of this were mandalas and kingdoms and mandalas. And nowhere in that book or in his talk does he mention that the Kathmandu Valley was one of those mandalas. And if he'd looked at the valley and taken it seriously, there would have been a great deal more that he could have helped, and perhaps in some cases not helped so much some of his arguments in that research. But just look at the valley and look where it's constituted and look how far it takes. If you walk 30 miles a day, if you really want to go and you're young, you'll see that it's fairly closely connected to the earliest heartland of Buddhism. And we do know that when we get into later times that there was a very dynamic exchange, and scribes and painters, especially text painters, were moving back and forth from the Pala region into Nepal. So that this region was not peripheral, it was not separate from South Asia. And so it sort of always annoys me when people say South Asian Buddhism died with the Muslim raids of 1192 or something, because the tradition continues unbroken in the Kathmandu Valley into the present day. And this survival is not a footnote to history, it is really central to understanding some of the historical issues, in my view. So we might get into some of these issues, but what I'm here to talk about today is the revival of the tradition, the Newar Buddhist tradition in recent times. So just so we know where the Kathmandu Valley is in the modern state, what it used to look like, and this valley that was dominated by and sustained by rich rice lands and cities that where houses were built close together and farmers lived in the cities and farmed their fields. It was actually an old lake, and the soil is incredibly rich. But the Kathmandu Valley, unfortunately, has become a little bit like New Jersey, some of the finest soil in the world that's been covered by parking lots, highways, and construction. In addition to the agriculture that sustained the valley was trade, and trade in goods moved from the plains of North India through the valley, and then from the valley up to the Tibetan highlands. And the valley itself became a supplier of goods in both directions, especially in cultural items that were related to Hinduism and Buddhism. So in that sense, I like to look at the Kathmandu Valley, which has both Hinduism and Buddhism deeply in its history, going back to the Chinese pilgrims, to see this area as a kind of frontier area. And when you read the literature in geography about frontiers, they're quite interesting places. They preserve many archaic cultural forms and social ideas, as well as being places of innovation that sometimes feed back to the core areas. There's a wonderful dynamic that I think did take place with the valley in that sense, and that allows it to preserve many aspects of ancient Indic civilization in the many different paramparas of Hinduism and Buddhism. So the old valley was dominated by large cities, and they were small city-states. And eventually there were three that came together by the early Mulla period, that is 1482. And these Durbar squares are all some of the most remarkable places in the Kathmandu Valley for their extraordinary constructions, their elaborate artistry, and the diversity of artistic forms. So if you've been there, you know these places all the tourists go, etc. And they exemplify the remarkable cultural wealth as well as the vitality of the people who sustained myriad traditions in Hindu and Buddhist forms. Now, that's the background, and I want to switch now to my case study, from which I will think through some of the issues of revitalization and the reconfiguration in the title of my talk. Since 1978, I've been going to this famous ancient neighborhood in Kathmandu, a crossroads, 6 lanes meet, called Asan. If anyone's been to the Kathmandu city and you missed Asan, I don't know how you did that, but it's a long road that goes from the Durbar Square in Kathmandu to the northeast part of the city. It's one of the major axes in Kathmandu. And I like to explain that, that when you're doing research, you live in the old neighborhoods and you form connections with families and you work through case studies of your case study of Newar civilization. The neighborhood looks like this on a typical day, and when you're doing sort of anthropological religious studies, you try to get the rhythms of life, let's say on a daily basis, and then the yearly rhythm of festivals, and then the rhythms of the individual life cycle. So this was my first office in Kathmandu, right in Asan. And so, it was always something to see and always a place to ideally notice processions, cremation processions, festival processions with deities and chariots and being borne on the backs of the devotees. And so you get a sense of the rhythm of life, and there was a festival, Hindu or Buddhist, on the average of every 5 days. You look at the calendar of religious events and the lunar scheduling of things, and you see how busy life can be. And a lot of them are just the interest of a few people. But this is the way it goes, and this is what the chariot looks like that pulls Avalokiteshvara through the city streets in Kathmandu. An even larger chariot and more precarious one is built in Patan every year as well, so that this chariot goes right through the old city pulled by devotees. If you've seen the film On the Road with the Red God, this is that kind of festival. And then some days when the goddesses need to be brought into the center of the city, 3 goddesses meet and the whole of Asan turns into a religious theater. So this place is a place of great wealth. The merchants are Buddhists in majority. There are also Hindu merchants. But they are the ones who were with the kings, and they were kings in the past, who built the landmarks, the temples, the shrines, and who also built the celebrations through the creation of, in Sanskrit, called Goshti, in Newar today it's called Guti, voluntary associations that had land or other resources that yearly provided the means to do an elaborate worship service with a Buddhist Vajracharya priest or a Hindu Brahmin or a Karmacharya priest, and that would also always involve a feast. And so the traditions were funded by the hundreds of gutis that provided for their continuation. Some of these include practices that we read about, such as the cult of the book, where you have books that were part of the guti, and every year the possession of the Prajnaparamita texts, as well as the other items in the group's Guti's possessions, go from leader to leader, and that leader in rotation is in charge of that year's celebrations. Mostly the curled manuscripts are land registry documents, but there are some Buddhist scriptures on them, and then perhaps most famous are the remarkable numbers of illuminated manuscripts that, for example, has been studied by Jinna Kim, who's at Harvard. So we have texts and the cult of the book and many rituals that are still done, and we'll see new invented or newly rediscovered rituals that are in this mode. But I just wanted to go over the material culture of what the Newars have in their religious traditions. They do remarkable wood carving, for example. There are over 300 monasteries in the valley, and most of these monasteries have traditional clay tile roofs that overhang the foundations, keeping the monsoon rains off foundations. And the struts that hold those roofs up are almost always ornamented with carvings. And the tympanums, the toranas above the entrances and above the sancta are also places where the Newar artistry and wood carving is seen. And there are many different genres. The cities of the valley have different artistic communities who work in slightly different ways. And some of the embellishments on temple and home architecture reflect a vitality that is it's one of the most extraordinary places artistically in Asia. And then we could turn to wood, from wood to metalwork. Lost wax casting is still done in the valley, as well as various kinds of repoussé art that makes images in a variety of forms with the whole Indo-Tibetan pantheon in play. And then there are painting ateliers where traditional paintings are still commissioned, families still commission paintings, often the case to mark important events in the life cycles, especially of their elders. And anytime there's a diksha, there must be paintings painted of the main deity that's the subject of the initiation. So the tradition is still very much alive in its traditional mode. The painting in the lower right is one that I saw with my teacher, Eric. This is the exact moment I was at Jack Zimmerman's house in 1982, and he wanted to know what it was that he had bought. And so we went and photographed it, and then it's when I informed him that I knew right where it was stolen from. And I was banned for life from Zimmerman's world, but this painting has finally surfaced at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. And the show at Holy Cross in 2019, we're going to show it for the first time with a translation of the long captions that go along in the 3 panels across. It's an extraordinary painting. It's 30 feet long and 4 feet high. So these were usually displayed, these banner paintings as they're called bilampao in Newari. They're displayed under the eaves of the monasteries in the valley where they've been produced. Not only that, painting in various tanka, so-called tanka styles. We also have the banner paintings, and then there's a dying tradition, unfortunately. And this, I'm hoping that the Huntingtons at Ohio State did a better job of documenting these. These are fresco paintings that are often painted and put on family houses that do extraordinary festivals of donation, such as, I think, the surviving Pancha Varsika that we know in the Buddhist texts that is still carried out in Patan and Kathmandu. So when you give a donation to all the monks in the kingdom, you're allowed to decorate your house with various frescoes. And this is still done, but this old style fresco is not what people are doing anymore. These are peeling off of walls now and slowly disappearing. There's also stonework in various modes. The creative and energetic rendering of, for instance, the wind god above a public tap, and the sun and moon gods, and then these are details of some different gods on temples that you can see in public view and sometimes in precarious public view, but in temple courtyards, etc. The one on the right is a late Lichavi Avalokiteshvara that I'll show you what it looks like today in a few minutes. So yeah, these cultural practices. The Newars have, again, my teacher always used to say Buddhism is a very expensive luxury in a society, and you should never forget that. And that you need patrons, and you need the support of kings and leaders in a community. and you need people who deserve to receive the patronage. So when you look at the practices in the valley, this is what Panchadana looks like. This man is actually a Vajracharya priest, but he sets up a pavilion and for 3 days gives donations to whomever comes to his stall to receive alms, to receive dana. And he's put out all his family images, and he sleeps in the pavilion, and then he decorates his house with the 5 Buddhas and whatever else he can afford to put on the house. So that's almost a yearly thing now with wealthy families and with the new wealth that's been created through land sales. But the biggest festivals of all are called Sameka. And Sameka in Kathmandu is every 12 years, and in Patan every 5 years. And you have to do an even bigger kind of donation to all the monks and women in the Kathmandu Valley. And if you do that, you get to build a Dipankara Buddha like you see on the right. And the families, the rich guys don't get inside the image. That would be much too difficult for them. But they hire farmers to get inside, and they process through the streets when a new Samek is held. They go the first day to the royal palace and the second day to the Swayambhu Stupa. And it's one of the most extraordinary sights in the Buddhist world that most people have never seen who are in Buddhist studies, I fear. But these farmers that they get to be inside the images will not move until they are given their encouragement. They need some nutrition. And they're not talking about rice and lentils. They're talking about spirits that keep them moving. And so these Buddhas move through the streets lit by Petromax lanterns or lights, sort of swaying as they get a little further into the spirit of the festival, moving through the streets together. The big ones stand about 8 or 9 feet tall, and it's metal up into the shoulders and the heads, but the bottom is wicker covered with silk, as you see there. Many families in Asan have done this donation festival and participate every time it comes up. The only display of these images was done in Los Angeles at the Circle of Bliss exhibition about, almost 20 years ago. So the merchants are the ones who are responsible for the wealth, and their gutis, their organized events, their family festivals are what pay for these celebrations. And the market is therefore, to me, always part of the story of Buddhism. And if you go to Buddhist pilgrimage places, there's always a market. There's a votive market. There's a rich synergy going on that makes cities, pilgrimage places, merchants, artisans, all part of this matrix of important connections that make Buddhism successful. And I think it was always part of South Asian Buddhism. Now, I want to say a bit about the earthquake of 2015, and I want to say a little bit about this new research initiative I'm doing. I'm hoping to learn perhaps from some of you. This was not the big one that we had feared and we still fear will happen, in which the valley, like it was in 1933, is really laid low. I've collected historical photographs from that earthquake, and half the buildings in Kathmandu were on the ground in 1933. It was like 4% were uninhabitable after this one in 2015. So this wasn't the big one, although there were some spectacular collapses of temples and houses, including the Kastamandapa temple is the temple from which Kathmandu gets its name. So after that earthquake, and after talking to friends and scholars, art historians such as late Dina Bangdel, I decided to try to work up some material that I developed as a foolish graduate student, doing way too much work. But we got the land registry map from Asan, and we did a caste map. And so the people I study, they're kind of orange, and the Hindus are the blue. And if you know Kathmandu, this is Janabahal, the center of Avalokiteshvara's biggest temple in the city, which I put in my research area, making it way too large for any person to really be able to do. But that's the place I've been showing you. And so, yeah, a caste map is what you try to do. I mean, I wished I'd been in a village with, 25 homes. We had about 800 units of ownership there. And this is the map of the shopkeepers. So, door to door, months of my life and my assistant's time doing this. But you need to do that. It was very important to just realize and understand who's where and how the place is organized. And that, to me, is the foundation of studying any Buddhist community, is to know the people and to see what the context is. But this is what I'm going to be working on for the next few years, which is that we took that map and then we documented through photographs every stupa, every well. This is a Bahal, this is a Buddhist monastery, it's a branch of this one. And we documented every public, it's like surface archaeology everywhere. And I didn't publish this before because I was worried that this is the perfect tool for an art thief to try to find the oldest stuff. And let me see if this, so this did not, some things got pushed off, but they're examples of the temples. This is the Ganesh temple and Annapurna temple, etc. And so we're creating a open source map in which you can click on the numbered places and see the images. So that this sort of the one example of a Hindu-Buddhist urban environment will be preserved in complete detail as it existed in 81, and then we're going to do some ground truthing and check this. But it's a GIS system if you've ever played around with this stuff, and I haven't, but I'm learning fast, or trying to. And so it really gives you one case study like we have no other, as far as I know, on this level, with this level of detail. So that's sort of the next thing, and I'm starting to think about my research archives and all the black and white images and slides and all, and what happens to them when I retire, and then when I go to hopefully the Pure Land, what will happen to all of these materials? It's a serious thing to think about, and you don't want to wait too long, as long as you're still making sense, at least most of the time. So what's been happening? Well, what's been happening in recent years, that's like the 1990s, is that there's an increasing a deterioration in many aspects of this material culture. There's been a lot of art theft, growing numbers of it. There's even books that show before and after images. This is something that Dina Bangdell and her father and other scholars have been concerned about, just seeing the effects of this. And I've been on Fifth Avenue many times at Christie's or Sotheby's, and you know right where it came from. You just wonder how they could ever sell them anymore. And I think the Met a couple days ago gave back a stone image to Nepal. I don't know if you followed that, but the curator, I've been in touch with him about who do you give it to. It's a little tricky. But this is just an example of the predation that's happened over the years. Now that Avalokiteshvara I told you about, this is protecting your heritage. So there it is. I took that in 1980, and then now it's behind this, and it's been painted with this gold, I think enamel paint, and it's now behind two sets of locked doors. So I assume Avalokiteshvara still works even in those circumstances, but it's a very different aesthetic, and I don't see people. This used to be a very popular place for worship in this large courtyard in the western part of the city. What's interesting as well has been the attempt by new groups in the city to rebuild cities that fell down in the earthquake or that were falling down anyway with traditional forms. And there are groups, architectural groups in the valley that are trying to encourage not just building cement boxes, but to revive and reuse traditional forms. So that's that's part of this story of the material culture of Buddhism. As I said, the frescoes are being lost, and nobody seems to be doing much about them. I had hoped at some point to find someone who would at least apply some kind of preservative or something to keep these around, but they're peeling off faster than anyone could save them now. I think they're beyond saving, except in our own documentation. Now, another thing that's happening in recent times to talk about this revitalization is that there have been new efforts to include, from the Newar side and from the Tibetan side, to integrate their Buddhist practice into the Newar tradition. Until fairly recently, Tibetans and Newar Buddhists were a completely separate entity. Newars have a name for Bodha, Kasti, but they never go there in any traditions that I've ever been able to find. From Patan, from Kathmandu, there's no connection. There are merchants who have shops there, but that's about it. Swayambhu is their stupa and their place. But now you see, if you go around the monasteries in Kathmandu and in Patan, you see Tibetan groups. Some of them, I think, are fairly well off, going on a circuit of monasteries that only they seem to know. Some of them are associated with particular Tibetan figures who were said to have visited that place, but others are just notable, beautiful, well-preserved monasteries. So, there is a kind of hidden Tibetan influence in Bhaktapur, Patan, and Kathmandu, where Namtars and other texts mention Situ Panchen and others going to the valley and visiting these places. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's really where these new traditions are coming from. What we see in the shops in Kathmandu that underwrites these traditions is that there are so many young people coming to the U.S. for schooling and then who stay, that there are many shops that are just being manned or operated by elders. That's it. In some cases, it's elder women. In some cases, it's wives as well. The brother has gone to live in Australia, and so there's one brother and his wife, where there used to be an extended family of brothers running shops. What this has led to, in fact, is that many of the shops have been lent out to outsiders. And so we think about 1/3 of the shops in Asan are now operated by non-Newars, whereas it was 85% Newars, 35 years ago. So in a way, there's been a hollowing out. And the same thing can be said of the people living there. Many of the richest families in Asantol have now moved up into the edges of the valley where the air is cleaner and where the water goes on daily for more than 10 minutes, where they can run their generators and where their standard of living and their infrastructure, at least for them, works. And so, again, you have many families renting their apartments or their homes to outsiders, non-Newars. So this sort of organic solidarity of Buddhist community in this once thriving and 70% Buddhist grouping is now dissipating. The problem you have is that there's limited land, and so when you divide the family property between brothers, this is the kind of thing you get. This is one of the craziest ones, right? It's barely a stairway in the back with about as far as my arms can reach. That's where we are. And it's a hookah bar, apparently, so there are hookahs on every floor or something. A real innovative sort of. That's what it looks like from up on one of the mountains, looking out over the valley. This was once mostly green, and now it's wall-to-wall people, valley to valley mountain people. And when I look at that, and my first reaction when I've been going back recently, I'm saying, well, it's everything that we could imagine that was terrible, or it would be the worst case scenario, has come to pass. And it's true, there's no urban planning, there are no parks. The infrastructure is very shoddy in some places, non-existent sewage systems, for example. But they kept building, and the government was so dysfunctional or non-existent that that's what happened. And that's what we're stuck with. So the population has grown immensely, partly because of the Maoist insurgency. People, the middle class, left the hills, and they wanted to get away from the dangers of being, around without protection from those waging the civil war. It was a good investment to come to Kathmandu for your children, better schools. And so the hills have been very depopulated. There's some villages now that are only old people and children, very young children. And the other reason for this is labor in the Gulf. But what also has happened in the city is that there has been this motorcycle apocalypse. Everywhere, every courtyard now has those kinds of scenes you see with motorcycles there. It's hard to move through the streets. The motorcycles have just submerged the lanes and the courtyards. There's so many more people there. And then if you go to Kathmandu's airport, you'll see that every day there's a Gulf airline full of young men going to work in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, elsewhere. Israel, women, Nepali nurses working in Israel, thousands of them. All kinds of diasporas that we barely know enough about to fully understand. But and then even in the United States, an unheard of number, almost 60,000 Nepalese Americans now in the United States. So what does it mean? Well, it means that all these great numbers of people who have come to the valley are adding to the size of the market that the urban merchants sell to. And these guys, a lot of my friends, they do not want to talk about their balance sheets, but they're making money more than they ever have. Yes, their environment is degraded. Yes, there's so many people. Yes, motorcycles will run you down. But yes, they are making profits like they never have before. Okay, so it's not so simple. That's one side of that explanation. The second is with this diaspora, there are now remittances coming back, and now there are more funds coming from remittances than from tourism in Nepal. So now you have the wealth of the international diaspora of Newars coming back, and this is true for many immigrants groups in this country now, is that they start to bring in the priests, the monks from the home country. They start to build replica organizations here, but they also want to do patronage back in the home territory. And they go back and they share the wealth with their home communities. So there is now more money than ever before available for what we all need, which is merit. And how do you make merit? Okay? So here we have these examples of this. Now these World Newar organizations now, they are very chauvinistic. They have a strong Newar is a true Nepali kind of thing. But they're trying to keep their kids with their ethnic identity and keeping them moving back and forth, visiting the home territory. At the College of the Holy Cross, I have a young lady from Asan in my class, which when I started there 27 years ago, I could not imagine how they'd ever end up at Holy Cross, but they're there. So we have this diaspora now. Australia is another place. I don't think I put it on that map, but the wealth of the expatriate community is now flowing back into the Buddhist tradition. That's the takeaway from that. For example, last fall, this is the Boston Newar community. 250 Newars came together to celebrate Indra Jatra, which is a big festival in Nepal. It's a sort of an archaic one. You don't have many Indra Jatras across South Asia, but Indra Jatra is still celebrated exactly the way it used to be. It's even described in the late Vedic text where you put a pole up and you make Indra the king of the city for the week. And Indra rules in Kathmandu for that festival. And there's also folk festivals. There's an elephant, sort of white elephant that dances around, and there's a lakke of masked dancer. I didn't put all this in there, but they fight in the city streets as part of the play of the festival. Well, they're recreating that in the suburban Boston. Not only that, there's now a Vajracharya priest in the upper right who you don't have to go back to Nepal to have your children do the life cycle ritual of first rice feeding, or of their leaving home for study, or marriages. You don't have to go back to Nepal for that. Now the priest has a website, and you can call him to do that, and he can explain why they're doing what they're doing. So it's a great development for the Newars who've migrated and become permanent residents or citizens. And this is one of my proudest moments, when one of the priests, and we had a festival on Homa at Harvard, and we did a Newar Homa right in the middle of Harvard Square. The Harvard police almost shut us down because they thought it was dangerous. Grains and Homa there. So this is the vitality. And when I came to Boston, in Boston, New England area in 1990, we had nothing. And the few Newars that lived there had to go to a South Indian Hindu temple to feel anything like their home region. So this is the way it's developing now, as a kind of like in other places, a global network of devotees from the homeland who are permanently migrated but who still feel connected. And so that's contributing to the revitalization of the Buddhist tradition in the valley. What's also happened is that the artisans, the great master artisans that are still working in Patan especially, have found their new markets overseas. If I had grad students, which I don't, and when I talk to my friend Leonard, who has many graduate students at Harvard, most days I'm happy that my undergraduates leave and I don't have to worry about them. But if I have 25 good dissertation topics right in my pocket here. I would just sit in some of these ateliers in Patan and watch who is buying their stuff, because I've sat there sort of randomly. South Koreans, have you ever done this there? I mean, there are people coming from China, Tibet, Korea, South America. The Karmapa Monastery in Woodstock, New York, I don't think our group went there, but if you go in there, they have this new sanctuary. When you go in there, it looks like you're in Tibet, except the images, huge Buddha images, about 8 feet tall. I walked into the sanctuary and was finally done about 5-6 years ago, all from Patan. And those are gilded $1 million images. I mean, unbelievable. I've seen Newar images in Beijing near the Yonggigong and the Lama Temple, as it's called. So I would love to figure out just where these images end up. And of course, they're being sold in catalogs from the various Buddhist supplies distributors in this country as well. So they're making images as fast as they can. You have to get in line. Unless you buy something in stock, it's very difficult if you have a custom order to get it within a couple years. That's how busy they are fulfilling these kinds of orders. So the artisans are big-time donors too. They're making money so fast. They're just constantly busy. So the Newar tradition itself, to understand what's revitalizing, when I found this image in Patan, I thought, now this perfectly captures it. There's a basic sort of devotion to the Buddha as part of this tradition. And then there's a Mahayana component focused mainly on Avalokiteshvara. And there's the tantric element with this yogini that symbolizes that very elite and also very high caste, usually, practice. That's this amalgam of interconnected traditions that also would characterize late Indic Buddhism. So this is what we have in the valley, and all of these different strands of tradition woven together have been revitalized and are being, people are reinvesting in them, not just in the material side, but also in practice. And that's what I want to turn to now. Now, to be a Newar Buddhist male, and this is part of your coming of age, you have to know how to beat a drum, a two-headed drum, and walk in procession. And And these groups that form to do the summer holy month of Gula, usually late July to late August. It's lunar, so it moves around. Different merchant groups form bhajans, and they process through the streets. They have to hire the low caste guys to play. Now they play Western instruments. You see this guy with the clarinet. Newars the merchants don't play those instruments. They have to hire them. But they go through up to Swayambhu, around the stupa, various circumambulations. They gather and they go back to their neighborhood. And you're not a man unless you can do this. And I don't think we have time to do this, but maybe we'll come back to it if you want to hear what it's like. They kind of rock out. But that's what it means to be a householder Buddhist. That's what it means, to play the drum and process. And you see drummers around some of the Sanchi images. This is what Buddhists have done. Now, what's happening with them? Well, in the old days, it was ragtag. Now they got their T-shirts. Now they got the new drums. They got the painted drums. They got the classes. And you can kind of see there, but this is the one that blew me away when I was there in 2012. And I thought, yes. You see what's different? It's gender. The girls insisted that they could drum just like the boys and maybe better than them. And so all that excluding of women in this tradition, now all that energy and enthusiasm came from the young women. And for the young married guys who didn't want to get up and process to Swayambhu, suddenly they want to get up and process to Swayambhu. Just saying, that's the way it goes. And you can see that what they're playing with the one hand with a stick and one hand with this kind of with just their open palm. And there are other symbols, small symbols, large symbols, and no musicologist has really done this right, but there are at least 25 different compositions that they play going through the streets, and they're actually even played at certain places going up to Swayambhu and back in the old days. And I documented that, but I didn't have time to do everything. I didn't get around to figuring that one out. But that's how articulated the tradition was. Now, back when I was in Kathmandu as a young scholar, PhD scholar, this man started a school for Vajracharyas because he saw the problems with the young people. And he ran a school for about 5 or 6 years. And most of the young men, and I don't have a good image of, this is the graduation. And this great Sanskrit scholar of the valley, Divyabhadra Bhadracharya, came, and a great ritualist from Patan, Ratnakaji Bhadracharya, came and presented the awards to the kids. It's sort of a Western thing that they're doing here. And the anthropologist got to hand out some of the awards. I was new there, so it was a very strange thing to be asked to do. But most of those guys went on to go to college and to have regular careers, not religious. But in the past 15 years, as they've been successful, married with children, they've come back. And those seeds planted when they were kids have given them a basic literacy in the elaborate rituals that are done in their tradition. And the ritualistic realm here is immense. There are almost no philosophical commentaries that has ever been found in the Kathmandu Valley. But what they do with great energy and articulation are rituals that implement the ideas and the protections and the meditative beginnings of one's interior practice. So, one of the guys who was in this school, the star student, went to Delhi University and did a PhD in Buddhist studies. And he's now almost 50. This is Naresh Bhadracharya. He's a student in the parampara of Badri Guruju, who died a couple years ago. Naresh has now become a major figure in the valley. And he has inspired, so he has many initiations and much expertise in ritual. And he's brought his fellow classmates and created new classes, and they're leaning in, and they're doing new rituals, and they're figuring out new ways to capture the devotion of their parishioners. So this has been an extraordinary thing to see, and I didn't see that coming. I thought that school was basically a failure, but it wasn't. Not just for him, but for this whole community of Vajracharya priests. There's also been a whole plethora of publications of writing down what's in the text and publishing things. And what's the occasion? It's when someone dies in your family. It's a classical thing, yet with a printing press. It's meritorious to make a text and to put the photo of the person who's died and to publish it for that purpose. But the value of that is that these texts that are in individual families are now distributed through all the Vajracharyas in the valley. So they're using the technology to make the ritual expertise available to anyone who can read. So it's quite an innovative use of the technology. And what's also surprised me is that it is now a thing among the rich and among the wannabe rich and among those who want to keep up with their Buddhist relatives is to take diksha, to take abhisheka. And this also I didn't see coming. Naresh knows enough, and he was a Fulbright professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. He has patrons as well as connections to Korean Buddhists, Taiwanese Buddhists. He knows the Tibetan model is not to be as secretive as Newar's always were. And so he has disciples across the Kathmandu Valley who, when he's giving an initiation, and even a Mahayana sort of meditative meditation, he will have 600-700 people sign up. And he's a Kathmandu Vajracharya, but he will attract devotees from Patan and Bhaktapur and Timi and all kinds of other places. And now, how do they publicize it? You got it, Facebook. So Facebook allows him to reach the Buddhists in the valley in a way that was completely unimaginable, 30 years ago. So this is the way it's moving, in that the tradition is revitalizing using the technology, the energy, and the idealism of these middle-aged practitioners who love being Newars, and it's very important for them to be Newar Buddhists. So, this is the way it is. Now, he's still not given an initiation to anyone, or just anyone at all. But the idea that you have to be born a Vajracharya or a merchant member, caste member, is no longer a restriction. And that was a big deal with his teacher. And it's no accident that as soon as Badri dies, Naresh expands the circle. People really want this initiation, and they convince him that they should have it with their spouse. Then he does them periodically. I never wanted to push the boundaries of this, but too far. But I did find the photograph, the negative, that everyone who gets initiated into Chakrasamvara's Diksha will get a big print of that for their use. They can have a painting painted as well, but. So that's the way it's going with the sort of democratization of Tantra, if you will, if I were to put it that way. Now, the merchants in the valley are incredibly flush these days. This man was my former landlord. He supplies the gold paint for the Tanka painters in the valley and the gold repoussé appliques. And he has a formula he got from Tibet. Nobody knows what it is, but everybody comes to him. He's ridiculously rich. Let's see. This guy is named Diamond Sao. He's a Japu. He's a farmer. Used to be, Japus were the most numerous Newar caste. But he got into the jewelry wholesale trade. And I can't vouch for him. He's from Patan. I don't know him. But he was a major patron. This guy's name is Pilot Sao. He is a pilot for Royal Nepal Airlines. Still doesn't, even though I know him now, I'm still not flying Royal Nepal Airlines, but he's a good guy. He's a very generous guy. In fact, he's going to come to our opening when we open our show at Holy Cross on Buddhist ritual art next year. Let's see. I forget about this guy. Oh, this guy is owns the Toyota dealership in Kathmandu. We don't even need to say how rich he is. So these are the people who are rebuilding Buddhism and reinvigorating it, paying not only for initiations, but to do rituals. So whereas these ritual traditions were dying with Naresh and with some of his disciples now, we're seeing all kinds of rituals that I'd only heard about or looked at the text and, well, no one does this. Okay, well, if no one's doing it, I'm going to put it over here. Now I've got to take them off and say, okay, Namsangati Guti ritual almost disappeared. Let me go forward to that. So they've made a new tradition where Namsangati processions to several temples around the valley. Newars also, by the way, make these chalk mandalas. They don't use the little metal things, they're all by hand, but they have many traditions of this. And again, this is Naresh doing this, but they have processions, men and women. They chant the text together, and there's also a meditative component to this. And it turns out I have one of the few published texts to go back to the mid-70s that they have reissued for that purpose. So new traditions are coming into play. They've also revitalized and reactivated the community by having these Jataka stories. Now, I have published a lot about these. There's some Jatakas that are domesticated in the landscape and geography of the valley. And so people show up to hear. This is Badri before he died. He was one of his many skills was to impersonate and to tell Jataka stories with tremendous theatrical effect. So this is the story of Manichuda that he's telling in this gathering. And he can make it come alive if those of you who were in Toronto, Naresh told the story of Simhala, the merchant who and his companions were captured by the Rakshasis. We did that with a banner painting reproduced for the Royal Museum in Toronto, Ontario Museum in Toronto. So he has gotten this guy's, he's learned from him, and he also tells a really good story. So we go to Namsangati. And this one I didn't see coming, and I translated one of the popular texts that are used in the valley. Women got together and decided that they need to do something, and so these Vajracharya women will now, if you call them and schedule them, they will come to your courtyard or house, or school apparently, it's another one, and they will come and chant the Pancaraksha for you to sort of banish bad things and to establish a good presence in the area. It's sort of like Parita and Theravada tradition. There's been a lot of work on these, and this may have been the most popular apotropaic text in the Buddhist world for a long period. It was translated into Chinese, many versions. There's a lot of scholarship on that. But the Newars are doing that, and I'd now like to make a presentation to the foundation. These are prayer flags, Newar prayer flags, that are based upon the Pancaraksha, that are absolutely iconographically and mantraically correct. These are the 5 Pancaraksha deities. So they now, Newars, there they are. They will now, if you're doing a Newar ritual in a public place, they will use Newar prayer flags. And this is another, they're selling about $1,000 a month of these prayer flags. I don't know what Tibetan prayer flag sellers are making, but that's silkscreen, and they're really quite high quality. So there you have a new material culture item from the Newar tradition that came out of this revitalization movement. So to me, this is the takeaway. Newars not only preserve ancient traditions, and I'm currently trying to correlate quotations from Chinese pilgrims on what they were seeing with what's still done in the Kathmandu Valley, just to make it so unsubtle. about the value of the living cultural forms of late Mahayana Vajrayana Buddhism. But this is what happens, I think, in Buddhist history. This is common sense. This is what the logic of being a non-virtuoso Buddhist is. When you make money, you turn it into merit. And how do you do it? You build tradition. And also, part of what they're doing is also meditative and spiritual with these different dikshas coming back as well. So you need to buy your ritual. You have to buy your way into those initiative traditions. Now, this all came together to me, and it really, now that I look back at it, I see, oh, Lumbini showed me all of this in spades. Now, somehow, Lumbini, when it was designated, it's one of the 4 great pilgrimage places where the Buddha was born, the organizers wanted countries from around the world to build monasteries in the style of their home country and to make an international park around the holy place in Lumbini. And it's a huge place. If you haven't been there recently, it's quite a remarkable place. I think there are over 50 monasteries and stupas now built in Lumbini in this park. But somehow, they forgot to ask the Newars of the Kathmandu Valley to build their monastery, which will tell you about the priorities of the organizers and the funding that would come with international groups coming in. I don't want to go there, but believe me, there's this national dysfunction in this story. But finally, the community in Kathmandu said, wait a minute, we want to build a Newar-style Mahayana Vajrayana monastery. And so, while Badri was still alive, Naresh and members of his circle said, we have to do this. They went to the merchants, and the merchants said, we will do this. What are we talking about here? We don't know. Who knows? Construction. Who knows? But it's probably $2 or $3 million. They're right now at about 5 or 6 million, and still not done, but almost done. And so they got together and they made a plan. They got the architects. Of course, they're architects in their community of Buddhist merchants. Everybody's working synergistically, relatively inexpensively, engineering firms. They get a design. You see a little bit of that in the back of here, this digital layout on here. And this is what the park looked like, by the way. So these are all these different monasteries. It's a mind-blowing place. It's one of the stranger places I've ever been to. But around this site, you just go from one to the other. You can be next a Thai monastery next to the Soka Gakkai one, next to a Chinese one, Burmese one, etc. So they're putting their presence into this place as well. And so, starting in 2011, they get together, they make a vow to do it, and the problem they had, and this is where I do wish I had a graduate student. I had a Harvard guy he realized he's too smart to go with an outsider guy to be his advisor. But someone had followed this thing all the way through. It had been an incredibly interesting case study because Newars had not built a new monastery since 1768. That's when the last one was built. They had no one around who knew how to build a monastery. They had no archive of texts. This is what you do, that's what you do. So they had to dig back into their archives and get the old men to try to think about how do we do this. I mean, they've been making stupas, but we're talking about a vihara here. There's a whole, has stupas. And they, the Siksasamuchi and other texts that they knew were for that, and they had to go back and read them and figure out what to do. Still not so clear. They're rather vague. They even went to an inscription from a Mulla temple that is very detailed in what's necessary and what was given to the monastery. So they learned from their own inscriptions, but they basically had to reinvent what to do. And they did it scrupulously. If Newars do anything, they do things trying to dot every I and cross every T ritually. And they take forever to do these things, but they did it. And they made the vow. They got started. They gathered the community. They got their act together and they made some decisions. And the merchants said, we will do it. And Naresh is the guy that's the Harvard Square home. I guess that's part of his dossier. And they got a design and they worked it up and everyone agreed. And if you have time, and this is online, they even had a Buddhist merchant singer, popular singer, write a song, and it was all over it's a very catchy tune about brothers and sisters. Listen, there's a new vihara going up in Lumbini, and you can donate, and this would be a great thing to do. I'm tempted to stop, but I won't get to the end. But it's there. If we have time, we can put that on. It's a very catchy tune. I like it anyway. And so they got all this going, and then, this is what I mean, they laid out the plot of land that was given to them as a huge mandala. And they followed the text, and they laid it out with string, and then they got it all oriented according to the Siksasamuccaya and several other more local texts, trying to figure it out, inventing it as they go along, Naresh and the senior men. And they had to do, and the whole thing I can't have time to tell you about, but they first had to pacify all the Nagas in Lumbini because they didn't trust that any of those other people pacified the Nagas. And you're screwed if you don't have the Nagas on your side. That's for sure. And then they also did the Bu Puja, which they had to get the earth to agree. And they had certain signs that the earth was assenting, and then they worship Hariti, which is Hariti is a major presence. And they decided that whenever they weren't completely sure about what to do, or if there were any difficulties, when they didn't know what else to do, they chanted the Prajna Paramita text in as big a group as they could assemble. So it was sort of to make the merit, to smooth over any errors or any problems that they had. So this was their approach. And as best as they can, following the ancient Mahayana, Vajrayana traditions. And these things took forever to finish. But we have videoed most of them or photographed them. And I could not be there. They were doing these every few months down in Lumbini. But we have documented from finding the rock to carving the stone, to bringing the stone, to instituting the stone. And a couple of weeks ago, they initiated and did the eyes of the stone, right? Everyone knows this is what every Buddhist monastery in India, at least, was supposed to do. So they have rediscovered and re-implemented these older ideas. So the patrons, as I say, are now the local rich, the affluent, as well as the internationals, who have been very enthusiastic about this. And you can also see there's a documentary film they made about themselves that was distributed on the internet to attract people to donate to this organization. And this is the brilliant part of it. This is the brilliant part. Let me see if I got this right. Okay. So you have to make stupas. So what do you do? Everyone knows, have anyone ever seen a stupa made from scratch? Anyone ever seen that? So this is what you do. And this is the way, they knew this, and Tibetans know this better than other Buddhists perhaps. When you make a big stupa, how do you fill the anda? You make lots of little ones and you mush them together. Short answer. And so they got people to make, and they distributed the molds and sent them internationally. These are the Boston folks. They're really simple ones. I have much more elaborate ones too, and Tibetan ones that make them bigger, and they're made of metal. Give 100 clay chaityas, give 100 rupees. Poor people. Bigger people, richer people can do a lot more than that. And then, so all of this patronage came from all points in the world, along with boxes of stupas that these local communities made, right? And so thousands, tens of thousands. And they threw in some other ones too, Avalokiteshvara, others. And they're all making this, and they're all collecting them. And finally, the monastery is coming together last year, and now they're gonna start finishing the Dharmadatta chaityas in the courtyard of the monastery. And these are the boxes that came in. They kept them in boxes locally, but they came in from Australia and all over Europe and around the world. There they are, coming in. Now, underneath a stupa is a special construction. This is in the text. So they get them all together, and this could be a talk in itself. I'm really screaming through this. And that's what you do. See what they did? The pilot sow had this beautiful gilded image buried underneath the real stupa. I mean, the above ground stupa, I should say. And the Newars have the mantras that they do when they complete. Every one of these has been infused with the Chaitya mantra it's in their tradition. So they put that, they set it in exactly the right place, and then they start pouring them in and filling up the hole until there it is. And then they cover it all up. Archaeologists will find that one day and go, whoa. And then they build, the stonecutters bring their construction, and they put all the levels and the mandala that's underneath the Dharmadatta Chaitya are put in there. This again is Naresh Bhadracharya, and they finally finish the construction, put it in place and put it there. All right? And of course, puja. Lots of donation, all kinds of offerings that are made. The Chaityas get all the life cycle rituals. This is from the Siksa Samuchaya that a person gets. So they do all the life cycle rites for the stupa when they do it, and it finally is established. And then there's a similar ritual for a huge fixed metal mandala that's placed in front of it. So they also devote the same kind of attention to that mandala, because that will be a regular facility once this is a living, used institution. Now, Naresh was telling me that then you have to put the gajras. When you start to finish your building, you put these gajras. And he just wanted decorative things, because the texts don't say you have to do this. But no, the merchants wanted to have these huge gilded chaityas on top of their monastery. Each of these is 5 lakhs, 500,000 rupees. Pilot Sow got one, and Diamond Sow got another one. And they're pretty amazing. And the newest thing is that they're going to sell replicas of those now for donors who want to, you build the building, but you need the endowment for the programs, right? Stanford has that formula, probably just like everyone does. So they're thinking of the future now. That's what's ahead. And there's also a ritual that they did. They have these long hanging things here. There. Siddhuri. They come and they're hung from the top. So this is more or less what it looks like today. This is when they had just gotten it. Those are the prayer flags, the announcements. There's still some other work to be done. And that's why So when I look at Buddhism, and I know I have simpaticos in the audience, and I'm studying Newar Buddhism, the fate of the Newar Buddhist tradition cannot be understood separate from the material conditions in which it has both declined and then now risen and been revitalized. And I think when we look at history, we have to imagine that similar circumstances, similar contingencies, householdings wanting and needing merit, and how the tradition prescribes making merit that has such profound material consequences, all these must be part of the calculus. Ideas, great. Ideas, Buddhist teachings, great. But what really got this community going was, to some extent, ideas and spiritual practices, but it was also being a Newar Buddhist and not letting that identity be lost in the midst of all the changes that have gone on in the Kathmandu Valley. So, I relate this in another way, and I haven't done much on theory and analysis today, but given you a lot of case study material, but the work of H.L. Senavaratne is to me very, very helpful in understanding that Newars haven't had a king. Well, they kind of murdered each other there in 2001, but they have no more kings at all since 2008. So we have no more kings. That's a real problem in Buddhist history, because it seems that all the texts that had authority, they couldn't imagine a world that wasn't a kingless world, right? And now the world is pretty much a kingless world, except for a few other places. So what do you do now? It's up for grabs. And I think what these merchants are doing, I mean, in Sri Lanka, the Sangha has tried to be active and try to, be the active shapers of Buddhism in practice and political Buddhism. And that's a whole other situation. But in Nepal, the merchants are trying to do what kings used to do, which is to revitalize, restore, and protect their tradition. So let me just, this is the postscript. This happened a few weeks ago. Well, it was just when I was putting the slideshow together. But now the main image has been turned on. The lights are on now in that image. The eyes were painted and the mantras have been chanted. And so the monastery is alive. So that's where we end my talk today. And I'm really eager to see if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for time.
Okay.
Can I just take your other question?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I just start with thanking you for something that is unusually positive. Right? In the sort of,
I know.
sort of the general
Yes.
sort of theme of globalization and the vanishing of traditions is quite a different kind of story.
Yes.
And especially given what I said is horrifying degradation of the Kathmandu Valley from what I knew in the 1980s.
Yeah.
This is great that it's actually not losing everything.
It flips the expectations, and I'm really bummed out too. I don't want to go back and live there like I used to. But here, two more things if you want more positive. The electricity, I don't know when you were back there. Electricity was more rationed than ever from about 2011 until 2016. And they discovered that it was a completely artificial situation, that the electric company was being bribed to keep all the industrial park and all the rich people on all the time, and by what you had to do in Kathmandu is have a second electrical system run by batteries. And you had to rewire your house for the batteries when the electric was off. Those purveyors also bribed the electric company. I can't believe people would do this. It still astonishes me. So they swept them out. In China, they would shoot them, right, for people who would do that for so many people for so long. So the electricity is on all the time now. Okay, the second thing is they finally completed the reservoir system up in Helambu, which means that the water, when I lived in Asan, we had water for 10, 15 minutes a day. And it was like a war of the power of your pump. Who can pump the water up to the tank on the roof so you'd have any water at all? Otherwise, so they have 5 or 6 linked reservoirs up in Helambu and coming down into the north part of the valley near a place called Sundarijal. And the water can be on all the time. So they're replumbing, they're repiping the entire valley. So my assistant, who works for me, he works for me all the time now, he has water in his house the whole time. And he has electricity the whole time. And anyone guess what that allows for women? Guess what that allows? I always used to give my friends a hard time. A little extra money, buy a motorcycle. I said, why don't you buy a washing machine for your wife? Because even these rich ladies are up on the roof with the pails and everything. When the electricity is on all the time and you have water all the time, it means you can buy a washing machine, right? That's a big positive thing. And the water is pretty good. You still have to boil it and filter it to drink. So those are 2 other good things. So I'm feeling slightly, but the air still sucks. The air is not to be mentioned. On the worst days, it's worse in Delhi, apparently. Yes, John.
I understood all of your criticisms of the quotations on your opening.
Yeah, there's one that's a little.
Except for the Peter Harvey one, I don't really understand.
Yeah,
what he's saying or what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
All Buddhism is mostly remained a junior partner in a syncretism of tantric forms of Hinduism and Buddhism. So what's he saying and what's wrong with it?
I don't know what the junior partner is. For Newars, it all builds. And, if you want to go further, you keep going on to Tantric Buddhism. Buddhism is just a junior partner. So it's sort of like Tantra is the syncretism of Hinduism and Buddhism. There are Hindu Tantras, there are Buddhist Tantras. And the only tantric tradition that exists is not a syncretistic one. I guess it's less of a serious problem than the others, perhaps. But yeah, and listen, the reason Newars aren't so included in the curriculum, well, one is that no one, it's not part of any research agenda, and Newar is not a canonical language, so the way research universities work is philology, and we have to have, so that, I understand all that. But there is a persistent sort of judgment about Newar Buddhism that goes back to Hodgson, really. And it's depressingly consistent all the way. There are others that goes through that. So people have been sort of chased off or scared off. Snellgrove, when I first went to Nepal, would say, "Oh, I'd love to have studied here, but the bloody place is so disgusting." I saw him like a week after I got there, and he was so encouraging. But he said, "I'm really glad someone's doing it, but I pity you." Okay. He has one chapter in Buddhist Himalaya about Newar Buddhism. Not bad, but just usual surface stuff. Yes?
When did women begin more active participation?
When did this revitalization? Well, when Naresh finished his PhD in 1990, what was interesting, in 1990 there was a revolution, and the Hindu kingdom was under great criticism. And what was interesting, it always fascinates me how these politics get into culture. One of the demands was to have some non-Brahmin teach Sanskrit at the Sanskrit colleges in the country that are under royal patronage. So they immediately appointed a Vajracharya Pandit to teach Sanskrit. And that was a line of patronage from the state. And so when Naresh came back, he and some of his friends could be employed teaching Sanskrit at the Sri Chandra College and at the Sanskrit universities. So that was just a little twitch right there that gave the young men a reason to keep studying and to keep teaching. And then they had students. And so I think that's really when it started. But it was amazing to me how quickly the state had to, break this Brahmanical sinecure that they gave to these Brahmin families. It was a very surprising thing. No one's talked about this, no one's written about it very much, but I think that's really what was going on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was very fascinated about the music, and there was not a trumpet player and there was a clarinet player. Did they actually change the music to have Western instruments join?
Yeah, the old Newar thing, and the Japus still do, the farmers still do this, they play a wooden flute called a basuri. And the Japus have some really old, distinctive things that they do. I don't know, did you ever see the basuri bhajan? But they'll go playing the drums and they'll have 15 or 20 guys playing the flutes in harmony, together on the melody, which is, it's a wonderful sound, and they're really good at it. They're actually more than the gula bhajan as a musical form. They also play a drum that's much bigger called a da. And the da songs are all in Sanskrit. And no one's ever touched them either, but I think they have more tantric elements to them. But they make a deeper sound, like a dong, like this, dong, dong. And they gather at temples early in the morning, especially during festivals, to play the da. And the person who leads it has a small cymbals, and he keeps the time and does that. And then the third form is a kind of like the Hindu bhajans, which you have a harmonium. And Newar Buddhists have probably written 200 or 300 songs to be played in that mode, because they play Hindi music songs, or they put Buddhist lyrics to Hindi music, Hindi movie music, and that's where they rock out. And then the people, violins, people show up and can riff in and out of that. It's sort of like Buddhist jazz night. Now I don't know if they're still doing so much. I'm thinking about going back this summer, but that's something to look for. And again, there have been a few studies, a couple German scholars, but this is rich stuff. I mean, I thought about translating some of the songs. They're pretty straightforward and all, but they have a few they have some it's a wonderful perspective. It's sort of Mahayana bhakti that, and I don't know if other parts of the Mahayana world have such things, but sort of transfiguring it from the Krishna bhakti or the Vishnu or Shiva bhakti into the Buddha is it's just because they like the music, but it's typical of what the Buddhists do. You see, they're not going to sing the Vishnu or Krishna songs. That's not them. They like the form, and they like the structure, and they like the beat, and they like the sound, but they're going to sing about the Buddha or Karunamaya, Avalokiteshvara, or about Vajrapani. That's what they want to sing. And so that's what they have always done, I think, is that they've always sort of twisted the Rubik cube. It starts red and it turns out to be yellow. And it's the same components. They do puja. They never sacrifice animals in front of any of the bodhisattvas or anything. But the first time I saw it, Vajracharyas have animal sacrifice rituals. Did you ever see Annapurna? The Vajracharyas will do rituals to satisfy goddesses who demand blood, because you'd be stupid to anger the goddess Annapurna. So if she needs blood once a year, they have the ritual, and then they stop and they go like this, make the offering, and the japu comes out, and I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it, but that's upaya. That's upaya. That's what they have to do. The goddess makes life possible. Hardati makes the children healthy, and the goat has to die. That's the way it is, right? That's the logic of it. That's the logic of their world. And I think it was the logic of Indic Buddhists going way back as well. Yep.
I think it's not your time, right? So join me once again in thanking
Yep.
Professor Lewis for a wonderful talk.
Happy to share.